Okay, I think we're rolling. Let's dig into the world of altcoins today. I know it's a Monday and I rarely bring you a video earlier in the week, but I wanted to use the next 20 to 30 minutes just to paint a bit of a picture of where I see the altcoin market going in the cryptocurrency space, and ultimately to flesh out my view that we're a million miles away from alt season. I'm sorry guys, I know it will disappoint a lot of people, and many have stopped by on the YouTube channel recently to tell me that they think I'm a complete idiot and that I'm going to stay poor because obviously, everybody's going to get rich because altcoins are going to go parabolic any moment now. And I've heard this argument time and time again, week in, week out for years now. And really, alt season has only occurred twice in my view. Once at the back end of 2017 into very early 18, and again in 2021, where we saw a more sustained longer term move in the altcoin space. But ultimately what followed, unsurprisingly, given the kind of gains that were created in a very illiquid market, was a really, really significant crash that we experienced in 2022. And so it's my view that the market conditions just aren't there at the moment for us to see the kind of parabolic gains that everybody's looking for. And ultimately, when BTC eventually starts to roll over, which I think it is starting to do, we're going to see a significant historic crash in the price of Bitcoin, and altcoins are going to get hit even harder, catching everybody off guard, because I think everybody thinks that Bitcoin going up means that there is ultimately just a matter of time to wait before some of that money starts to flow into altcoins and we see historic gains, and you can pretty much throw a dart at anything in the crypto space and it goes up 10, 20, 30x. I just don't think that's going to happen. So let me start explaining why I believe we're at least, I would say, a year, potentially as long as 2 years away from seeing any real strength in the altcoin market, and why I'm being really, really cautious in how I'm deploying capital at the moment. Certainly not putting anything into the altcoin space. So look, before I dig into it, obviously usual stuff, just to say that none of this is financial advice. I would really, really recommend that you take nothing I say with any level of seriousness, and certainly don't make any investment or financial decisions off the back of anything you hear here on my YouTube channel or over on X. The clue's in the name. I'm a part-time trader. I'm not a finance professional. I'm just somebody who is obsessed with technical analysis and markets and has spent years trying to hone my craft. I think I've turned myself into a pretty shrewd operator, and I've made some really good calls over the last couple of years, but I certainly would recommend that you do your own research and you find your own way forward with your investment strategy or your trading strategy, and you don't take advice from people like me on the internet. Right, so this is the USDC dominance chart, and I wanted to start here because I think it's my view that this chart is going to underpin absolutely everything else that happens in the crypto space for months to come. USDC is obviously one of the leading stablecoins in the space, and what you can see over the last 2 or 3 years is that in periods where USDC dominance is trending down, as it did here, you see really significant strength in Bitcoin and alts. I mean, this period here from sort of like very late 2022 into early 23 is where we got the major moves on coins like Solana, Ethereum to some extent, Bitcoin obviously putting the bulk of its big move up into the 6-figure region during that time. And what happens when USDC dominance is trending up is that cryptocurrencies suffer. So just to paint a picture of what that looks like, obviously here you had USDC trending up, USDC dominance trending up, just as Ethereum was crashing, and then we saw this kind of topping out in USDC dominance, which coincided with the period of accumulation on Ethereum that preceded significant upside. So, broadly, you can see there's an inverse correlation between these two. When USDC dominance is going up, money is flowing out of cryptocurrencies and into stable coins, and vice versa. And what I am seeing on the USDC dominance chart at the moment is that this big downtrend that fueled a lot of the upside for Ethereum, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies back in 2023 came to an end very early last year. This is where I started to become bearish on altcoins. and many of them have failed to put in new highs since. And more recently, we've seen strength off of these lows. So what I'm seeing is big downtrend break, period of accumulation here. And now I think we have just broken out of this accumulation and we're back testing the top of that range here. And those of you who follow me on at Part-Time Charts on X know that some weeks ago, back in mid-April, when this turned out to be a deviation of this key level here, I predicted that USDC dominance would come back to test this region. And as you can see on the chart here, I said that Bitcoin would top here. So time will tell whether I'm right. At the moment, we are seeing a bit of weakness in the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other coins, just as USDC dominance reaches this support level. So what I'm anticipating is that in the weeks to come, we're going to come back up into this region and once again flip this level into support, and this time it's going to hold for real. And I think what that does is open the gates for a much bigger move in USDC dominance that is really going to put Bitcoin and particularly altcoins under pressure. So I just ask you to come at all of this with an open mind, guys. I mean, you know, I know lots of people have been studying the basics of TA for some time. If this were your favorite low cap altcoin that was going to make you rich, would you look at this chart and see it as bullish? Of course you would. You would be saying downtrend broken, accumulation, break of the accumulation, and a retest of the range high before a bigger move up. So you've got to look at the market dispassionately. Just because this is USDC dominance and because it doesn't bode well for the future of altcoins doesn't mean that I'm going to completely ignore it. If anything, this is, in my mind, the key chart in the cryptocurrency space at the moment. And if I'm right and we start to flip this level here and it holds, boy oh boy, altcoins are in trouble. And the funny thing about the altcoin market is that most altcoins have been weak. You know, you look at something like AVAX, which I'll come on to in a bit, it's been nowhere near a new high since 2021. And I think there's just this automatic assumption that because Bitcoin is so strong, it's only a matter of time before we all get rich on altcoins. In my view, it's not going to happen. The market has changed. And there are so many people holding altcoins. There are so many bag holders from the class of 2021 that I think they have to be punished and they have to be wiped out before we're going to see any sustained strength in the altcoin market. And like I say, in my view, that's not going to happen for some time. So look, this is the key chart that underpins everything that I will be touching on for the rest of this video. And much like we saw a deviation of these highs back in late 2024, so sort of September 24, and then we saw a move back to the lows, I think we're seeing something similar now. We've deviated this level. You know, this was where I genuinely thought this was the big breakout a couple of months ago, and that Bitcoin and alts were going to get crushed. Obviously, we've come back in, we've retested this region, but unless we get back under this key SR level, if we were to start closing on a weekly basis underneath, then I would say that opens the door for much lower, and potentially we get a big move up in altcoins. But at the moment, there's nothing in the chart that suggests that that is the case. So this support seems to be holding, and I expect us to push up much higher. So what does that mean for the market? Well, let me start by looking at BNB. And I know lots of people have given me grief and abuse over this chart on X. People think I'm absolutely bonkers for believing that BNB is about to drop 95%. And I get all sorts of arguments ranging from alt season's nearly here, bro, all the way through to, you know, why would you bet against CZ and Binance? And, you know, perhaps that's a strong argument. I don't know. It really depends on what your view on the market is and how much of the price action is controlled by Binance. But for me, I just look at price action and I look at what the chart's telling me. And this to me looks like a massive distribution phase that dates all the way back to the peak of the altcoin market in April 21, where we had seen these huge gains. I mean, just look at this, guys. If you were lucky enough to buy anywhere near down here, the types of gains that you saw, even if you just bought on this breakout, you know, you're talking about 25x in the space of mere months. I mean, you know, probably just over a year, for, you know, not even a year, sorry, you know, like 6-7 months. That is crazy. You know, nowhere else in the world can you see those kind of gains in such a short space of time. And I think that's why everybody's so desperate for alt season to return. We all want it. We all want that period where, you know, you can refresh your portfolio every 10 minutes and see that you're getting richer and richer and richer. And, you know, lots of us didn't take profit at the right time, and myself included, in 2021, which is why I've spent years studying the markets and trying to better educate myself, because we all want that opportunity to come around again, and this time we don't want to miss it. Unfortunately, though, I just think you're going to be waiting a while if that's what you're looking for. To me, you know, we put these highs in, we've come down, we've taken out these lows, prices accumulated in this range. This was a fantastic opportunity to be going long. If you were lucky enough to grab down here at the range lows and ride to the highs, you know, you've done 3.5x during that time. Phenomenal gains. But I would be questioning, if you're not thinking about taking profit up here, I'd be questioning what you're seeing, because for me, all we've seen is, if you look at the daily, you know, one of my favorite topping patterns, we've seen this compression along this trend line, which eventually gives way. And on the higher time frame, you know, we've come up, we've taken these lows not just once but twice. We've flipped the highs into support very briefly, and then we've fallen back under. And since then, price just hasn't been able to get back above these highs that go back to 2021. And to me, this looks like classic distribution phase, call it a wick off, whatever you want to refer to it as, where the highs get taken out. You get a fake pump above, which leaves everyone feeling bullish. You're pulled back into the range, and then what happens is a big decline. And you can check out any of my recent videos to see why, on a macro basis, I believe that this is not the time to be investing in equities or crypto. I think we are in the early stages of a historic crash globally in financial markets. Crypto is not going to be immune. I'm not going to cover all of that kind of macro rationale here, because you can go and check out any of the previous videos. But from a pure technical basis, even if you think I'm bonkers for believing that price could come back into this region here, surely you've got to admit that this kind of price action, at least in the short term, doesn't look positive. And even if you think this is just one big range, I would suggest we're coming back to the bottom of that range, which alone, you know, just that alone is a, you know, 70% move from where we are back to the range low. And if I'm right and price goes much lower, you know, and I really believe that this is going to happen, I think we're going to see a total wipeout in the market that will leave people scared to go anywhere near cryptocurrencies ever again, ironically just at the point of maximum opportunity. So this is what I'm looking for on BNB. Yes, price has hung around up here a lot longer than I thought it would, but ultimately the inability of price to get back above these 21 highs just doesn't bode well in my view. And I think shortly we're going to start to see really significant weakness and a lot of panic in the market. So that is BNB. Tell you what, it's a cheap trick, but let me just invert this Solana chart just to make the point, right? So what do we normally see at the end of a major correction in crypto? We see big downtrend, which we've got, tick. This downtrend here has held as resistance all the way back to the start of the big move in cryptocurrencies just before 2021, and price has bounced off this multiple times, and then as we reach the bottom of the downtrend, what do we want to see? We want to see a period of accumulation. Ideally, we'd like to see the lows taken out, which we've had here, big tick. We've seen a fake down, you know, a forced breakdown from this period of accumulation here before a reclaim. And I think we are starting to base out here before we go much higher. Now, if this were the Solana chart, this is obviously Solana price inverted, but if this were the Solana chart, everybody and their dog would be bullish. Everybody would be saying, look at this period of accumulation. All the top analysts on X would rightly be pointing out that we've swept the lows, we've reclaimed the bottom of this accumulation range. Soon we're going to break this big downtrend, which often acts as a magnet for price and eventually gets broken. And we've touched it 1, 2, 3, 4 times already. 5th time's a charm. We're going to see price boom. The only reason that people don't see the chart that way is because that's the inverse chart, and people do not want to believe that alt season is not coming, that a lot of the appreciation that we were going to see in coins like Solana has already done, and that ultimately price is coming back into at least in my view the $3 to $4 region. But I think we might see price go as low as $1 in 2027. This move is massive. Even if you ignore all the kind of macro trends and some of the data that I've touched upon in my other videos, if you just look purely from a technical perspective, this uptrend, when it breaks, and I strongly believe it will, this uptrend goes back 4 years, 4.5 years. So when it breaks, it's not insignificant. And okay, it hasn't broken yet, but what we've seen is distribution. Think about that wick-off model. We've taken all that liquidity above these highs. All of the bears have been wiped out. We've now got back into this range. Yes, we've come down. We've swept the lows. Early bears have been wiped out. We've come back in to test the high of this previous range, which held for most of 2024. And now I think we're starting to see the weakness that I've been looking for. And ultimately, I believe we're going to break the range low properly this time. It's going to hold. And if I were thinking about where to take a trade, any retest again of this region here, this was the perfect entry, and I mapped this out for you all on X recently. But if you missed that, then I would be thinking about going short anywhere in this region, but with a stop comfortably above this location. Or perhaps the safer route would be to wait until the downtrend breaks and we start retesting the bottom of this range before price rolls over. So again, nothing to be bullish about in my mind on Solana. And here's another great example, Litecoin. This is a monthly chart on Litecoin. Now, one thing that I love looking for in the crypto space is a fake out, because often what will happen is price is so jammy and people will be sucked in thinking that this is a big accumulation range. The breakout is going to lead to really significant expansion that at least takes us back up to the highs from 2017 and 2021. And I can totally see why people would have believed that to be the case. I mean, if I zoom in and we start looking at this on the weekly, we've had this level which has supported price and then capped price for some time. And then you had this breakout. You had this breakout on the monthly back in January. And at that point, everybody was bullish on Litecoin. And I was the only one at the time saying, if this turns out to be a deviation, and if price gets back under the range high and retests it, lo and behold, what happened at the end of May, then that is going to be really, really bearish for Litecoin. And I expect price to be rejected before rolling over and potentially taking us back to prices that people did not believe we would ever see again. And so far, what we've seen is a break back into the range, a retest of the highs a couple of weeks ago, mid-May, and price has started to get rejected and is starting to roll over. So again, if I'm thinking about going long or short on this, I'm not touching longs unless we get firmly back above and hold above these range highs. And I just don't think that's going to happen. I think there are shorting opportunities to be had, particularly on the break of this range low here. And ultimately, I think when people realize that nothing good is happening with price action on Litecoin, I think there's going to be some real panic among people that have held for a long time, and people are going to get wiped out as we head back into that $4 region. On lower time frames, what kind of clues might there be out there that price is weak? So this is Lido, which is an absolutely pointless shitcoin that exists on the Ethereum chain. I look at it for no other reason than the price action is pretty clean, and I like using it as a proxy for the strength of the market. And so here, what you've got, these really clean levels that have held going back all the way to 2022 as support, and price has largely sort of traded in more or less just a big range, right? Now, what happened at the start of this year, or in April, was that price broke down, and back here, this looked like a retest of the underside. And if you remember, if you go back to some of the charts I posted early May on X, I said, look, price could start to roll over from here. Or I also drew this blue line, and I said it wouldn't surprise me if price comes back up to these highs here to take the liquidity. Everybody would be saying this is a bullish reclaim, but ultimately we get back under, and this red arrow acts as a trigger for more downside. And lo and behold, what has happened? So people keep mocking the charts, but they keep delivering. And what you've seen is we've come up, we've swept all of this liquidity. We're now back down, and we're underneath again. We're back under these lows here that have held as support for the last 2 or 3 years. So in my mind, there is nothing bullish about this. This is potentially an incredible entry for a short. I would keep my stops fairly wide, given that I wouldn't be surprised to see some wick action back into this region on the daily or the weekly time frame. But as long as price is holding back underneath the range lows, then I see absolutely nothing to be bullish about. And this is a slightly different longer term chart for Lido from Binance. And again, you can see these lows have held. I mean, look at this. If there were real strength and we were heading into alt season, right? This would have been the moment. This would have been it. We saw this big downtrend, the breakout. We reclaimed these lows here. So reclaimed a really key technical level. But instead what happened was that price kept revisiting that level until ultimately it broke. And if you go back to March, you can see I drew this squiggle, and I do anticipate, I know it's bad, guys. I know it's not pretty. I know if you're invested in altcoins, you don't want to see this, and nobody else is brave enough to tell you the truth about the weakness in the altcoin market. But this is what I'm expecting to see. And I think, to be honest, I think this is probably an optimistic target. I think it probably goes much, much lower than this. Potentially down into, single digits in terms of cents, rather than the 10 cents target that I've got here. I just think altcoins are really struggling to catch a bid. And if Bitcoin rolls over, if the economy turns sour, some of this stuff ain't coming back. I know this is another pointless shitcoin, and one that very few people care about. There were a few big accounts that were pumping it over the last couple of years. But look, this is PYR. I mean, just tell me, what is it you're seeing here that leads you to believe that we're on the brink of alt season? And maybe you might say, well, PYR doesn't matter. It's a pointless shitcoin. The ones that I'm invested in, those are the ones that are really bullish. But I just think this is indicative of where the market is heading. Look, for 3 years, this hasn't been able to catch a bid. You've had this big, long accumulation period here, breakout to the upside, and we started to close back under. And the moment that happened, it was bad news for PYR investors, and it got even worse when the lows started to give way and we started to hold under back in January of this year, at which point I drew this squiggle. And I really believe that this is too optimistic for PYR. I think these things are, some of them are probably going to go to zero. And you're already seeing, I don't want to name coins and projects, but you're already seeing lots of CEOs and founders of crypto projects are just leaving the space. They've taken what liquidity they can. And I'm not suggesting that that will be the case for PYR. I don't know the team. I don't know the project very well. But I would just be careful. Some of these coins, they hold very little intrinsic value, and if the market does turn sour, I suspect it's going to get really, really bad for them. And like I say, you're already seeing founders and CEOs leaving the space en masse. And I think that is because they realize that the time to get rich, the time to grab liquidity and to invest in some of these projects just isn't there anymore. The market has just fundamentally shifted. And I'll give you another example. Let's see if I can find it here. Right. So Matic, or Polygon as it's now known, this is, for me, this is one of the cleanest examples of what the altcoin space is heading for. We had this massive period of distribution, price consistently putting in lower highs, before ultimately breaking some of these lows that have propped price up for some time. And when I knew it was really bad, right? So lots of people were claiming that this was a sort of bullish symmetrical triangle similar to the one that we saw here, and price was going to go up. The moment that price broke out and then got back underneath that breakout, I knew that Matic was destined for the rubbish bin. And look at what's happened since. This was back in May last year. Price was at sort of 75, 80 cents. We're now at 20 cents. I was the only person calling for a significant decline back here, and it's taken some time. And yes, we swept these lows and price, moved up quite significantly. We went, over 100% up in the latter part of 2024. But ultimately, all we did was get rejected off of a key level. And I've been saying for months, but as long as we are underneath these lows, back in this pink box, so Trader XO, who is someone that I have a huge amount of respect for, he used to talk about the path of least resistance. And where is their least resistance? Think about the effort that is going to take after breaking these lows and holding beneath these lows for 3 or 4 months. Think about the effort that it's going to take to reclaim and to push higher versus what could happen if holders start capitulating and we just wipe out all of this inefficiency. So I do think we're heading back into this region here. So you've had this holders resistance before the big boom in 2021, and I believe that the first target would be to come back into that region before a small bounce and we roll over, and ultimately I think we're going as low as 1 cent, possibly even lower. I just think there's nothing in this price action that tells me that alt season is around the corner. So you can be selective and you can say, well, Lido doesn't really count, Matic, Polygon doesn't really count, but the point of alt season is that it's supposed to be a period of real strength for altcoins across the board, and I just can't see how that materializes. I'm going to wrap up with the AVAX chart. Again, lots of people mock me for this chart, but I said back here in late 2024 that market was going to top out, and that ultimately, in hindsight, this would just look like a massive channel, and that at some point in 26 or 27 we're going to come back to the bottom of this channel that will take us into the $1 to $2 region. And so far, for all the mockery, we are from top to where we are, we're down 60%. So I don't know, you tell me, guys, does this look like a strong market at the moment? I don't see it. And yes, we've had a small bounce in recent weeks, but look at it. All right, so we swept this low here and we bounced, but price has just rolled over again. And this looks like another lower high. I think eventually we're going to see really, really sour price action on altcoins like AVAX. The good news is, though, that AVAX is one of the few coins that I'm really bullish on post 2027. It's a fabulous network. If you've ever used it, in my view, it's a better network than Solana. I loved using AVAX back in 2021, and I think eventually a lot of people, when they're looking at layer ones, they're going to come back to AVAX as a potential scalable solution, one that has got a good track record, and one that down here will represent huge value for investors. So I will be keeping an eye on this, and if I'm right and this is just one big descending channel, eventually I do believe, and lots of people say to me, oh, if the market goes as low as you think it will, nothing will come back. But I really don't believe that to be the case. If I'd have told you up here, $150, that you'd see a 95% decline in AVAX before a bounce of 650%, lots of people down here wouldn't have thought that was possible. I believe that this is just one massive period of accumulation. A lot of balls are being shaken out. People will be left unable to buy the dip because they've wasted all their money. And the few of us that are around waiting to buy at the bottom, who are brave enough to buy in max fear, will pick up some huge bargains that will ultimately give us, I believe, incredible gains for years to come. So it's not all doom and gloom. I do believe that the altcoin market is going to get absolutely blown apart. And I don't think everything will come back. But what does come back will come back in a big way. And I think in the same way that everybody is going to be caught off guard expecting an alt season when it doesn't actually happen, what will happen at the bottom is that nobody will expect alts to show strength versus BTC, but they will be so cheap down here, and all of the liquidity will have been sucked up that any kind of new capital flowing into the space will see massive gains that will catch a lot of people off guard. And eventually, I expect Solana to be taking out the previous highs up in the $150 mark. And perhaps in a future video, I will cover off the AVAX BTC pair, which I think supports my view that in the short term, it's going to get battered. But in the long term, AVAX is going to be one of the strongest in the space. So look, hopefully that gives you a little bit of hope for what the future looks like. Obviously, none of this is financial advice, as I keep saying. But from my perspective, I am preserving my capital. I'm keeping my powder dry, and I'm waiting for historic buying opportunities. I do not believe that these are the historic buying opportunities that are going to give us massive gains. I think there are way too many optimists in the crypto space, and the price action is telling me that we need to shake them out in a big, big way. So I hope some of that was useful. Like I say, all for entertainment purposes, but if you have found any of the ideas interesting, even if you think I'm a complete nutter, but you think it's useful to have somebody painting the other side of the picture, because everybody is bullish at the moment, and do please hit subscribe and like and help me share this channel and hopefully grow it so I can bring you great content in the future. Look forward to speaking to you all again soon.